Right now, while you're watching this video, somewhere in the world, someone is dying. Not from a virus in a lab, not from a nuclear reactor, not from a shark in the ocean. They were killed by a creature that weighs 2 milligrams. Something you could swat between 2 fingers without even looking. Something you think of as a minor summer annoyance. That irritating whine next to your ear at 3 in the morning. By the time you finish watching this first part, mosquitoes will have killed around 50 people around the world. 50. That's not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That's a statistic from the World Health Organization. And here's the strange thing. We've grown so used to that number that it doesn't really register anymore. A shark kills 5 people in a year, and the whole world watches the news. A mosquito kills more people than all wars, disasters, and predators on the planet combined. And we just buy a plug-in repellent from the nearest store. Today I want to tell you about the mosquito, not the way people usually talk about it. Annoying, kill it. I want to tell you about a creature that is older than the Himalayas. A creature that has literally changed the course of human history. A creature you hate, knowing almost nothing about it. Let's start with age. When the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Rocky Mountains didn't yet exist, the mosquito already did. Scientists found one preserved in a piece of Burmese amber that is 99 million years old. 99 million. That's the age of dinosaurs, a time when the continents hadn't yet taken the shapes we see on a map today. And this ancient mosquito, frozen in amber forever, is virtually identical to the one circling your desk on a summer evening right now. It hasn't changed. It didn't need to. It was already perfect for its purpose. That's the first thing you need to understand about the mosquito. It is not an unfinished insect that nature forgot to update. This is the final version. A product with no unnecessary parts. Now, diversity. Most people think a mosquito is just a mosquito. One species, one problem. In reality, science has identified 3,600 species of mosquitoes. 3,600. Some live only in rabbit burrows. Some exist exclusively in the Arctic, living out their entire lives in a few weeks of the short polar summer. And one species, called the toxorhinchite, will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about mosquitoes. The toxorhinchite doesn't drink blood, ever. Adult mosquitoes of this species feed on flower nectar, like butterflies, but it is still a predator, and a ruthless one. Its larvae live in standing water and hunt the larvae of other mosquitoes, eating them one by one. In other words, there is a mosquito that kills other mosquitoes. Nature wrote that script long before humans came up with the idea of biological pest control. And that fact alone should complicate the simple picture where the mosquito is just the enemy. Now let's talk about how it works. Because when you start to understand the mechanics of this creature, your attitude toward it shifts, whether you want it to or not. Take the antennae of a female mosquito. Small, barely visible to the naked eye. Packed into them are up to 70 types of scent receptors. 70. For comparison, a dog has far more receptors in total, but uses its sense of smell for dozens of tasks. Finding food, recognizing other dogs, reading the emotions of its owner. The mosquito directs nearly its entire olfactory system toward a single objective. It is built to find you, not a generalist hunter, a specialist with an extremely narrow but absolutely razor-sharp skill set. And once it picks up your scent, the flight begins. And this too is more complex than it seems. A mosquito can fly into a headwind 3 times its own cruising speed. It doesn't fly in a straight line. It moves in a zigzag, constantly cross-checking the scent, refining its direction, adjusting course. Scientists who studied this flight path in the lab using high-speed cameras compared it to a self-guided missile. Not because it's a poetic metaphor, but because the algorithm is the same. Now reproduction. And this is where things start to inspire either genuine respect or genuine horror, depending on how you look at it. A female mosquito doesn't need a pond, a swamp, or a river to lay her eggs. A bottle cap with a little rainwater in it will do. Literally. A few milliliters of standing water, and the cycle begins. The larvae that hatch from those eggs can survive in water with critically low oxygen levels, conditions where other aquatic insects simply suffocate and die. The mosquito has claimed the ecological niches that everyone else abandoned. and that's why it's everywhere. Not because it aggressively takes over territory, but because it moves into the spaces that everything else gave up. A puddle in an old tire behind an industrial building, stagnant water in a flower pot tray on your balcony, water pooled in the hollow of an old tree in the city park. Where there seems to be no life, there is a mosquito. I opened this video with a number, 50 deaths by the time this first part ends, and I understand that number puts a clear label in your mind. Enemy, destroy. But before we get to that conversation, I need you to see this. The mosquito is not some random accident of nature. It is a creature that survived 99 million years of natural selection and remained itself. That evolved into 3,600 different forms. That built a navigation system engineers now replicate in missiles. That found a way to live where nothing else can. None of that makes it less dangerous, but it changes the question. The question is no longer, how do we destroy it? The question is, what exactly are we dealing with, and what do we lose if we win? A group of Dutch scientists once ran an experiment. They took 2 volunteers and asked one of them to go several days without washing their feet. Then, they placed both in identical conditions and released mosquitoes. The results were so one-sided, they were almost embarrassing to publish in a serious scientific journal. Mosquitoes chose the unwashed feet with such consistency that chance couldn't explain it. Expensive perfume, fresh soap, clean skin, none of it mattered. The mosquito wasn't looking for something pleasant. It was looking for something alive, and it found it. That experiment is a good entry point into what we're going to talk about now, because in this part, things get personal. In the first part, we looked at the mosquito as a species, ancient, diverse, engineered with unsettling precision. Now let's talk about what happens when that species meets you specifically, how it finds you, why you in particular, and what happens in those few seconds when it's already there and you don't feel a thing yet. Let's start with the detection system, because the mosquito isn't simply flying in your direction, it's working with you as a source of signals you're constantly broadcasting without even knowing it. The first signal is carbon dioxide. Every breath you exhale leaves an invisible trail in the air. A mosquito can detect that trail from up to 50 meters away. 50 meters, half a football field. You're sitting on the porch, talking, laughing, and with every breath, you're drawing a line in the air that leads straight to you. The mosquito enters that trail and starts moving upstream toward where the concentration is highest, toward you. But carbon dioxide is only the first layer. A rough guide that tells the mosquito, somewhere around here, there's a living thing. Then, the finer work begins. The second signal is lactic acid. It appears on your skin the moment you start moving, warming up, sweating. Even light physical effort, standing up, walking across the room, lifting something, triggers the process. A mosquito can detect lactic acid within 30 seconds of you starting to sweat. 30 seconds, not an abstract level of sensitivity, a specific time frame that scientists measured in the lab. And that's exactly why mosquitoes are so eager to attack people, on sports fields, in gardens, in backyards, anywhere. People are moving and generating heat. The third signal is warmth. At roughly 1 meter away, the mosquito begins to sense the infrared radiation coming off your body. At this point, it's no longer searching, it's homing in. Carbon dioxide brought it to the area. Lactic acid pointed the direction. Heat brought it in close. 3 independent systems working in sequence, each backing up the last. If one doesn't fire, the next one takes over. Now, why you specifically? Because this is probably the question that bothers people most. You're sitting outside with a group of friends, everyone in the same conditions, and you're the only one getting bitten. Everyone else laughs. You're furious. What's going on? About 20% of people consistently attract mosquitoes more than everyone else. Not a myth, not folk wisdom. This is the conclusion of years of research. And the most interesting finding in this area came from twins. Scientists studied a large group of identical and fraternal twins. The logic was simple. If mosquito attraction is determined by genetics, then identical twins who share the same DNA should be equally attractive or unattractive to mosquitoes. Fraternal twins, who share DNA the way regular siblings do, might differ, and that's exactly what they found. Identical twins were bitten at the same rate. Fraternal twins varied. The conclusion: roughly 85% of your attractiveness to a mosquito is determined by your genes. Not what you eat, not what perfume you wear, your genes. On one hand, that's deeply unfair. On the other, it explains why no folk remedy works consistently. If the issue is genetic, garlic isn't going to fix it. There are additional factors that genetics don't directly control, but that still play a role. One of the more surprising ones is cholesterol on the skin. Not the kind in your bloodstream that your doctor talks about. The kind that remains on the surface of your skin after your body has processed it. People with higher levels of this substance on their skin attract mosquitoes noticeably more. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but the correlation has been documented in several independent studies. Another factor is blood type. People with type O blood get bitten more often on average than people with type A. Scientists currently explain this through the chemical composition of skin secretions, which differs across blood types. Now, the bite itself. And this is something most people simply don't know. What we call a bite is actually a complex multi-step operation that takes just a few seconds and goes completely unnoticed. A mosquito's proboscis is not a needle. It's a bundle of 6 separate tools, each with its own function. 2 are serrated like a saw. They're the ones that cut through skin. 2 others spread the tissue apart. The 5th is a channel for injecting saliva. The 6th is a channel for drawing blood back out. The whole structure is so fine that it doesn't pierce straight through the tissue like a syringe needle. It bends, winds between cells, feels its way through. Scientists who filmed this process under a microscope in real time described it as navigating blind through living tissue. The proboscis is literally searching for a capillary, moving through the spaces between cells, changing direction until it finds what it needs. And the whole time, you feel nothing. Why? Because mosquito saliva is its own story. It contains several dozen different compounds, and among them are substances that act faster than a pain signal can travel from skin to brain. They literally outrun the nerve impulse. The saliva also contains compounds that dilate the blood vessels around the bite site, so more blood flows and flows faster, and compounds that prevent blood from clotting inside the proboscis. This is not a random cocktail of chemicals. It's a precision toolkit refined over hundreds of millions of years. And finally, the itch, which, as it turns out, has nothing to do with the bite itself. Small children being bitten for the first time in their lives don't itch at all. Zero reaction. Because the itch is not a response to the bite. It's a response from the immune system to the mosquito's saliva, and it only develops after several exposures. The immune system memorizes the composition of the saliva, identifies it as foreign, and starts reacting more intensely each time. That maddening sensation you've known since childhood and still can't stand. That's your own body fighting a microscopic amount of foreign protein. The mosquito left long ago. The reaction is yours. That shifts the perspective. The mosquito did its job quickly, invisibly, and flew away. Everything that comes after is a story about you and an immune system making decisions without your input. In 1881, France launched one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history. The Panama Canal connect 2 oceans, cut thousands of miles off global shipping routes, reshape world trade forever. Behind the project was Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man who had already built the Suez Canal and was considered the greatest engineering mind of his era. The funding was raised, the workers hired, the equipment shipped in, everything was ready. 20 years later, the French were gone, not because they ran out of money, not because they couldn't solve the engineering problems, but because over those 20 years, roughly 22,000 workers died from malaria and yellow fever. 22,000 people. The project wasn't stopped by mountain rock or tropical rain. It was stopped by a creature that weighs 2 milligrams. The Americans finished the canal, but before a single worker arrived, they did what the French had not. They systematically eliminated mosquitoes from the entire construction zone. They drained standing water, treated the swamps, imposed quarantine measures. It was the first large-scale project in history where fighting an insect was treated as an engineering problem, with a budget, a team, and measurable outcomes. Only once that problem was solved did construction become possible. The Panama Canal is not just a story about mosquitoes. It's a story about how a tiny creature stopped an entire civilization in its tracks. And there are more stories like it, far more than one or two. Take the First World War. Most people know about the trenches on the Western Front, Verdun, the Marne. But there's one front that gets far less attention. Salonika, in Greece. In 1916, British and French forces found themselves facing an enemy that appeared in no military handbook. Malaria took soldiers out of action faster than German artillery. It didn't kill outright, it wore people down. A soldier with malaria is not a casualty, he's a burden. He takes up space in the hospital, needs care, can't fight, but isn't dying quickly either. At the peak of the epidemic on the Salonika front, more soldiers were suffering from malaria than from combat wounds. British commanders wrote something in their official dispatches that sounds almost unbelievable. The mosquito on that front was officially deemed a more dangerous adversary than the German army. Not metaphorically, officially, in the documents. This was not the exception. This was the rule. Historians who re-examine military campaigns through an epidemiological lens consistently find that in most major conflicts before the 20th century, mosquito-borne diseases killed more people than enemy weapons, not occasionally, as a rule. Now let's look at these diseases not in historical terms, but in the present, because it's tempting to think all of this belongs to the past, to a time when medicine was weak and people didn't understand where disease came from. That's not true. In 1937, scientists in Uganda first identified the West Nile virus. It barely registered at the time, an exotic disease in a distant African country of little interest outside a narrow circle of specialists. By 2002, it had been recorded in every state in the United States. 65 years. The virus didn't travel by plane or tourist. It spread gradually, through migratory birds that carried it in their bodies, and through mosquitoes that bit those birds in one place and bit people somewhere else. Today, West Nile is showing up in Europe. It's moving, slowly, but without stopping. And that's not the only example of a disease that seemed local and became global, specifically through mosquitoes. Dengue fever, which 30 years ago was considered a tropical disease, is now appearing in southern Europe, not because tourists brought it, because the tiger mosquito that carries it is gradually expanding its range northward, tracking the warming climate. The boundary where mosquitoes can't survive winter shifts a little further north every year, and with it, the boundary of the diseases they carry. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, one that most people aren't prepared for. In Finland, scientists ran an experiment. In a small section of tundra, they suppressed the mosquito population, not eliminated entirely, but drastically reduced. They expected to see the ecosystem breathe, to watch other species flourish, freed from the parasite. The opposite happened. Within 2 seasons, the number of nesting birds in the area had dropped by 1/3, not because the birds had deliberately left, but because the food was gone. In the Arctic tundra, mosquitoes are the foundation of the food chain. They appear in such enormous numbers during the short summer that migratory birds travel there specifically for that resource, to feed their chicks, remove the mosquitoes, and the birds can no longer raise their young. Population collapses. They removed the enemy and broke the home. That's not the mosquito's only ecological role. Adult mosquitoes of many species are important pollinators. Some orchids in northern latitudes are pollinated almost exclusively by mosquitoes. Fish, frogs, bats, dragonflies, birds. A vast number of species depend on the mosquito as a food source at one stage of their lives or another. The mosquito doesn't just exist within the ecosystem, it holds part of it up. And so a question arises that scientists are debating with full seriousness. What happens if we win? If technology reaches the point where wiping out mosquitoes becomes genuinely possible, what happens to everything else? That question is at the heart of the largest anti-mosquito experiment in history. In 2023, 750 million genetically modified male mosquitoes were released in the Florida Keys. 750 million. Males don't bite. They mate with females, but their offspring don't survive. The idea is to gradually collapse the target population from the inside. No chemicals, no poison, no impact on other organisms. Early data showed a 76% reduction in the target species population in the areas where the experiment was conducted. That's a remarkable result. But the scientists running the project are the first to say, we don't know all the consequences. We're working inside a living system we don't fully understand. 76% is a success in terms of disease control. But what happens to the other 24% of the ecosystem, the one that built itself around this species over thousands of years? That's a question without an answer yet. I opened this series with a number: 50 deaths by the time the first part ended. That's true. And something needs to be done with that truth. Developing vaccines, fighting malaria, protecting people in the regions where mosquitoes don't kill abstractly, but concretely, every day. Children under 5. But there's another truth. The mosquito existed on this planet for 99 million years before the first human being appeared. It survived mass extinctions, ice ages, the drifting of continents. It is woven into the living fabric of this planet so deeply that we still can't say with any certainty what would happen if we pulled it out. This creature is simultaneously humanity's greatest enemy and part of the home humanity lives in. Two facts that don't cancel each other out, that exist side by side and demand not a simple answer, but careful thinking. The whine next to your ear at 3 in the morning is annoying. That's understandable. But now you know what's behind that whine. 99 million years of evolution, a targeting system more precise than most instruments we build, a role in the ecosystem we're only beginning to understand, and a history in which this 2-milligram organism changed the course of wars, halted the construction of canals, and continues to move across the planet. Slowly, without stopping, without a plan, simply because that's what it is. An enemy? Yes, but an enemy without